Welcome to MilSpouse Matters, the podcast dedicated to encouraging military spouses. I'm your host, Jen McDonald, and I was a military spouse for nearly 30 years until my husband's retirement. I'm now the mom of 4 young adults, including 1 active duty son. I also wrote the book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse. Through my experiences, I came to believe that we're only stronger together. Whatever life is throwing your way as a military spouse, let's talk about it. So hello, and welcome to this episode of the MilSpouse Matters podcast. This is your friend Jen, and I'm so glad you decided to join me today. Before we get started, I did want to mention that I am traveling and not at home, so I am recording with a little bit of a different setup than normal. So if you notice a difference in the sound quality, that is the reason why, and hopefully we'll be back to normal next week. So thanks for bearing with me, but I did feel like it was important to go ahead and record about this topic with all that's going on in the world. Today, we are going to be talking about when you're facing a sudden deployment or a deployment with very little notice. And I know that with all that's going on in the world, that is the reality for many of you. Before we get to that, I did want to mention, please go ahead and take a look at any resources that I mentioned. They will always be on my site, jen-mcdonald.com or milspousematters.com. And you can find, like I said, any resources mentioned. Plus, there is a ton of stuff for military families, from deployment support to resources for your PCS move or your military kids or just you as a spouse. So be sure to take a look at that. And as always, if you enjoy the show, I hope that you'll share it with somebody else that could use it too. And leave a 5-star rating and a review would be so awesome. That always helps the podcast. I did want to give a shout out to all the listeners around the world. I believe we're in more than 50 countries at this point. And also to the great members of the Military Spouses Facebook group, the Christian Military Spouses Facebook group. Please join us there if you would like. We are in the middle of doing a study of my just recently updated edition of my book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse. So we're in week 3 and you can quickly catch up. I put a video in there every week and we discuss the topics, and it's just been a really nice way to connect and share support. So join us there. So as I mentioned on my site, I have a ton of support for deployment, and I will link to that, both podcast episodes, a lot of podcast episodes about deployment from all different spouses, and then just some deployment support that you may not know about, as well as blog posts. So I will link to all of that. And I'm also going to be sharing some extra resources for both military spouses, kids, and even parents of military. So if your parents or your in-laws are struggling with the military member being deployed, you might be wanting to send them something, and that will be perfect for them. So with everything that is going on in the world, I know that there are a lot of you facing an unexpected deployment or a just little notice deployment. You may be looking for some support, and I just thought this was such an important topic to talk about. And I just want to tell you, I'm so sorry that if you're facing that, because I know from experience how difficult that is. Probably one of the hardest deployments our family faced was my husband's year in Afghanistan. We had about 2 to 3 weeks notice, and we were stationed overseas, and we were in a mad scramble to get everything squared away, to get ourselves prepared somehow, and with just such a little time. And it was a tough year for us, but we made it through. And I'm here to tell you that so will you. You don't have to face this alone. So I wanted to give you a few tips today to help you as you face a sudden deployment. So my first tip would be, don't face it alone. You may not think you need support. You may be a long-term military spouse, or you may feel very independent and think that you don't need support from the military, that you've got this. And you know what? You may, and you may be great until you're not. And I have seen from experience, remember, I was a military spouse for 30 years, spouses who insisted they were just fine, didn't need anything, and suddenly have a legal issue, or their ID card expired, or they couldn't get onto the base, and they did need help. And so it's no sign of weakness to admit that you need help or that you could use some guidance or support. So I would say, just to be proactive and connect with your ombudsman, your FRG, your family readiness group, or your key spouse, whatever your service branch calls it. They will always, always, always have ways for you to connect and get support. So there can be a deployment support group, a class that may be just something that you need, and will walk you through even pre-deployment, all of the legal things that you need to put into place, whether it's powers of attorney or, like I said, noticing that your ID card is going to expire while your service member is gone. And so you need to handle that and have things in place for that. From childcare, like free respite care, many CDCs on base will offer for deployed families an evening out where the spouse can get away. Even if it's a voucher for a free oil change, there can be deployment dinners. There's all kinds of things. And even if you don't feel like maybe necessarily socializing or getting out, just check in and see what they've got. Usually they have tons of support for military spouses of a deployed member. So just take advantage of it. And you can also connect with, like I mentioned, my own Facebook group. There are other deployments Facebook groups. I know Lizanne Lightfoot, the seasoned spouse, has a really big one. I think it's called Handle Deployment Like a Boss. I will check on that and make sure and link it. But these are folks that have also been through it and can be there to help you with maybe any questions that you don't even realize you have right now. Or like I said, if you're a, quote, seasoned or salty spouse, just something that may come up that you didn't expect. So I would say you don't have to face it alone. So my second tip would be, and this is going to be kind of contradictory, but stay busy or don't. So the conventional wisdom is to fill your time, to set yourself goals, and have all these things that you want to check off and help the time pass away from your military member. And I think that can be great and awesome. But sometimes you also need to slow down a bit and give yourself grace, especially if you have kids and you're doing everything alone. We can underestimate how much energy that's going to take. And I will tell you, I always underestimated how tired I would be, quite frankly. I would be like, I'm going to clean out all the closets and I'm going to train for a marathon. I'm going to do this. And, sometimes success is just everyone got fed. You got to spend time with your kids. Everybody got a bath and they're in bed. And so maybe keep your goals small, because we can set ourselves up for feeling less than or for disappointment. And so set some reasonable goals and also build flex in where if you don't hit them, that is okay too. So my next tip is to keep to routines if possible. So there is a lot of comfort and familiarity in our regular routines, even just us as military spouses, but especially for kids. If things have changed so drastically with a parent leaving, knowing that, their flow of the day is going to be basically the same. Their school day is going to be the same, and that they will have their sports, and then, whatever you normally do, your book reading together and your bath time and your bedtime, keeping those routines helps us stay healthy, and it helps give some familiarity and comfort to us as military families staying behind. I would also say, but treat yourself, build in something unexpected, give yourself something to look forward to, and it doesn't have to be anything big. Find a healthy outlet or a reward, like you taking a nap or you take a bubble bath, if you like to go out for a walk or a shopping date or whatever it is that fills your bucket. That's going to be individual for all of us, of course. Maybe like splurging on coffee that maybe you wouldn't have normally done because you're on a budget. So just find something small that you can look forward to, and that helps, I think, pass the time. My next tip would be to plan for down days and give yourself some grace. Just know that no matter how great your resolutions are or your plans, you will be sad, and that is okay. Realize you are human, and just expect that, and you won't be disappointed. I did want to read you something from my book, and it's called Goodbye Again, from day 20 from my book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement from the Heart of a Military Spouse. So I thought, you hear my pages rustling, I thought I would go ahead and just read this section to you, just so that you know that if you are feeling sad or down or blue, that it's not strange, that it's okay. You don't always have to be, quote, strong. So this is called Goodbye Again. And the quote at the beginning of this chapter says, "You have to say goodbye if you want to say hello again." And that is a quote from my grandmother. I wiped the sweat out of my eyes and pushed the mower through the thick Florida grass. Glancing up at the front window, I spotted my 9-year-old perched on the back of the couch, who gave me a thumbs up and a proud smile. He was in charge of letting me know when the baby woke up from her nap and was taking his job seriously. I waved at him and hurried to finish the yard work. This was my life with 4 young children while my husband left for an extended TDY, the term for temporary duty used in the Air Force, rushing through tasks that he and I would normally split when he was home. My oldest was not quite old enough to take on chores like lawn mowing, but he could sit in the living room, listen to the baby monitor, and let me know that everything was A-okay. My kids are older now, all of them grown, and I no longer look anxiously at the window to see if the little ones need me if I'm home alone. But I honestly believe there's no good age for kids to be without a parent. Toddlers or teens, it's hard. I've heard military counselors remark that having a loved one deployed is akin to dealing with a long-term illness or family trauma. It's an incredible ongoing stress. There are times when you simply can't be cheered up, and a lighthearted moment doesn't help you shake off the deployment blues. What are you supposed to do when you've had it up to here with being alone, with carrying the weight of the family on your shoulders, with worry over how it's affecting your children, with thinking you simply cannot do this one more blasted day? There aren't any easy answers. I've sat at countless soccer games and cheered my kids on alone, argued with an auto mechanic about the cost of repairs, while my mind screamed, "I shouldn't have to deal with this. My husband is the car guy." Cried irrationally over little challenges I'd normally let roll off my shoulders, and wrestled through more sleepless nights than I can count. When I go through long periods of separation from my husband, I often don't realize how tense I am until he returns home, and a near physical weight drops from my shoulders. I find myself exhausted for a few days, needing more sleep and feeling as though I'm recovering from an illness. Other spouses concur that they've experienced this too. During our long goodbyes, I've snapped when I should have bent and questioned when I ought to have trusted. But I'm thankful that God has promised new mercies for each day, and that He meets me right at my moment of need. He will meet you too. It's good to recognize our limitations because it's at that intersection of exhaustion and desperation that God promises to be with us. One thing I have come to learn through the years is that I'm not able to handle the challenges of life alone. Here's one of my favorite verses. "But He said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." And that is from 2 Corinthians 12:10. And I will just say that I hope that if you're a person of faith, that you can lean on your faith during this time, because I think it makes such a world of difference in getting through a deployment. So last thing I would like to do is highlight some support for military kids and military families. These are organizations I have mentioned many, many times on the podcast, but I want to bring them back to your attention. The first is the Comfort Crew for military kids, and they provide amazing deployment support. You can order a box for your child. These are more school-age kids, and they'll get a little kit, be able to write letters to the service member. They have a teddy bear called Cuzzy, and it's called Cuzzy Cares, and they are a nonprofit. So if you are looking to get a box for like a unit or something, reach out to them and see if they have availability. Often they have a waiting list, but it's worth checking out. Also, there's a site called Military Kids Connect, which is through Military One Source, and this is all ages of kids and kind of speaks to them about maybe the feelings they're having, giving some deployment help. There's even ways to connect with other military kids. And even if you're facing a PCS move, they can connect with other kids before they ever get to the base. But today I'm highlighting their deployment part, and I will link to that so that you can see what all is there, just because sometimes it's helpful as a parent to have someone else come alongside you to support and be another voice for your child. So I'd highly recommend that. There are a couple of folks I've had on the podcast that offer boxes for military spouses, and one is the Yellow Ribbon Box and one is Brave Crate, and I will link to those episodes where I spoke to them. So the other thing I was going to mention about building in surprises for your kids, also do that. So in my book, I know I keep referring to it, but I have lived this life and have experienced a lot of it. So I just want to point to things that will help support you. But one of the things I did during, I believe it was my husband's deployment to Iraq, was just kind of surprise my kids with some funny little things that weren't a big deal. This is from page 103 in my book, and it's called The Purple Wig. And I had dropped my kids off at Awana's one night, and I was going to go kill time until I had to pick them back up. And I passed this party store, and I thought, let me just walk in there. I was super depressed, having a hard time. And we kind of were all in that funk right after they leave. So I ended up just buying some random things like a nose and glasses and like this purple foil wig and put it away in my closet. Wasn't really sure what I was going to do with it. And then one day I just thought, I'm just going to walk through the living room with it on and see how long it takes them to notice. And it took them, I had to walk through a couple of times. And I just thought it was the funniest thing. And it was just something so simple, just to be kind of silly. And so over the coming weeks, I had all these little things like the nose and glasses, et cetera, and I just put them on to surprise them. And you may feel guilty having fun, but I know that I've mentioned this before, but my husband always said it helped him to think about us having normal family life and not being sad all the time. And so I think that's probably true for others as well. So do some simple things like have a themed day, have a weekend pajama day where everybody stays in their pajamas all day and you just watch movies and eat ice cream, and that's okay. Because these are those little memories that your kids will look back on and remember that you tried to help them through such a hard time and try to make some fun where you could. Do something surprising, even if it's just going to the park or going to the movies or letting them stay up later than usual. It's those unexpected moments that can really lift all your spirits. And again, refresh yourself too. What relaxes or reinvigorates you? Is it a long drive by yourself, going to the movies, or even just going to church and making sure you make time for your spiritual care? Do those things. Don't let those things slide just because your spouse is deployed. So down to my final couple of tips. This tip is so important. Don't listen to rumors. Only listen to official information. There will be official channels for you to get the news of what's happening with your spouse's unit. So I would almost even come to the point of saying turn off the news if you can. I know in this age of 24/7 on social media, constant news, if it's something that affects your mental well-being, turn it off and just wait to get information. And on the flip side of that, do not pass on bad information to others. Don't spread rumors. Don't share, I heard this or that. It just is not helpful, and it just adds to the stress. So only listen to official information. You should have a contact through your spouse's unit that will be passing on news to you as needed. The final tip is to trust their training. And I was inspired by this from a post from Elaine Bry, which, she's been on my podcast. And I just love what she's doing with really common sense, encouraging military family support. And her book is called Be Safe, Love, Mom. So again, if you have a military parent that is needing support, direct them to her site. She's got so much good stuff. But she posted this week on Instagram a post that said, trust in their training. And she said, my emotions are in a tangle. I'm angry that a country is seemingly prepared to invade another. I'm worried about all of those who might be in harm's way, including our own sons and daughters. But I know that all that negative emotional energy is not going to help anyone, but will hurt me. This is when I have to focus on trust. Trust in my Lord, trust in who they are, and trust in their training. They are the most advanced, best trained fighting force in the world, and I have to rest in that. And I would wholeheartedly agree. She said it better than I could. Elaine was a military spouse and has 4 children in the military and has been through something like 17 deployments of her kids. They're in all different service branches. So she knows what she's talking about. And I think that's just such an important message. They are trained for this. They could not be more prepared. So at some point, we just have to trust their training. And like she said, trust in God and try to lay that worry aside. I know it's easier said than done. So let me point you to a few places to get support. Like I mentioned, my blog and podcast, I have a deployment category for each of those, and I will send you to those. I have a free deployment devotional. It's a 5-day deployment devotional that you can download. I think it's 20-something pages. So on episode 32 of the podcast, I did a pretty extensive deployment resources for your military family. And that is quite a list of all sorts of things, whatever you're looking for, books for your kids, groups for you, different official military support. So take a look at that. On episode 73, I talked to Becky Hoy from Brave Crate, and she talked about how to thrive during deployment, had so much good advice. On episode 58, I talked to Ashley Keller, who's been through many deployments. As an Army spouse, she was also a veteran, and she talks about facing military life with focus and strength and talks about how she got through deployments. On episode 54, I talked to Casey Jones from Yellow Ribbon Box. She is a veteran and the spouse of an active duty Air Force member, and she is talking about her organization, the Yellow Ribbon Box, and just some tips about getting through deployment. She talks about getting through it with young kids. So I think that's really helpful information. On episode 53, I talked to Bryce Langley, who is a Navy spouse, and he talked about getting through his wife's deployments with his young kids as well. And just some tips, very practical, about how their family made it through that. On episode 52, I talked about support for parents of military members. Again, this would be for your in-laws or your own parents, and some things that could help them. On episode 24, I talked to Renee Walker about walking with young children through a parent's deployment. She also has a picture book called My Letter to Daddy and a Facebook page, so those might be things you want to check out as well. And then way back on episode 18, this is a little bit of a throwback, I talked about help. My spouse is deployed and I just moved here because I know that many of you may have just gone through a PCS move, or because of COVID restrictions, you maybe have not made very many connections yet. So finding your community as a military spouse can be really, really difficult if you're just facing a deployment. So I share tips from listeners and my own experiences with moving and facing a deployment right after a move. So give me some grace on that one. That is from 2019. So hopefully you can still find some good stuff in that episode. So I hope that all of these things help you in some way. And just know that, again, you do not have to go through this alone. There's so much out there to help you. If you're so inclined, please come join the Christian Military Spouses Facebook group. Reach out to me on Instagram at MilSpouse Matters. And I hope that you're also able to find some local community to walk with you through this time. Just remember, you are in my heart, and you are brave, you are strong, and you have got this, and you will get through this. So I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to the MilSpouse Matters podcast. Connect with me at jen-mcdonald.com, where you can find a free deployment devotional and other resources, or on social media as @MilSpouseMatters. You can find my book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse, on Amazon and other booksellers. Love the show? Please leave a 5-star review in whatever podcast player you're listening, and then share it with someone else who could use it too. Until next time, remember, you are brave, you are strong, and you've got this.